Good morning, everyone. Today, I want to talk about something that most people overlook, yet it plays a critical role in how you focus, how you learn, and even how you shape your brain. I'm talking about your ears, but not just hearing. I'm talking about how sound, when processed through your auditory system, literally gates your brain's ability to focus and encode memories and learn. Let's get into the science. Sound is not just a background element in your environment. It's a direct lever for shifting your brain state. When sound enters the ear, it's transformed into neural signals that travel along the auditory pathways and activate areas deep in the brain, including the brainstem, thalamus, and auditory cortex. But the influence of sound doesn't stop there. These signals reach regions involved in arousal, attention, and emotion, such as the reticular activating system and the limbic system, which determine whether your brain is primed for focus, stress relaxation, or even sleep. For example, sharp, unpredictable noises like a car alarm or a sudden shout trigger a stress response. Your pupils dilate, your heart rate rises, and your brain shifts into a hypervigilant defensive mode. That's your sympathetic nervous system kicking in, narrowing your focus, not for learning, but for survival. On the other hand, consistent low-frequency sounds like rainfall, ocean waves, or ambient hums have a calming effect. They cue the parasympathetic nervous system to take over, lowering cortisol, relaxing the body, and bringing the brain into a state of open focus that's ideal for absorbing and integrating information. The key insight is this: sound acts as a remote control for your nervous system. It can nudge you toward deep concentration or scatter your attention. It can elevate your alertness during a learning task or help you transition into recovery after intense mental work. And what's powerful is that this effect is fast, often instantaneous, because auditory processing is prioritized in the brain for survival reasons. So when we talk about optimizing focus or accelerating learning, it's not just about what you read or what you watch, it's about what you hear. Carefully chosen sound can prime the brain to enter a neurobiological state where learning isn't just possible, it's enhanced. The ear is more than just a receptor for sound, it's a direct modulator of your physiological and cognitive state. When sound enters the auditory system, it's rapidly processed by neural circuits that connect not only to the auditory cortex, but also to deep structures like the brainstem, amygdala, hypothalamus, and the reticular activating system. These connections mean that auditory input can directly influence whether you're alert, relaxed, anxious, or focused. This isn't a slow or subtle process. It's fast, powerful, and deeply rooted in evolutionary biology. Sound, unlike visual input, doesn't require conscious attention to exert its effects. That's why a sudden noise in your environment can jolt you out of deep focus without warning, or why a soothing soundscape can help you concentrate even if you're not actively listening to it. Your brain is constantly scanning for auditory cues to determine safety or threat, and based on what it hears, it shifts your internal state accordingly. This is why environments rich in certain types of sound, like rhythmic patterns, ambient textures, or consistent low-frequency tones, can move the brain into a highly focused yet calm state. That state, known as parasympathetic dominance, is ideal for learning because it lowers internal resistance. It quiets the internal noise that blocks memory encoding and makes room for high-bandwidth cognitive processing. Conversely, chaotic or erratic sound patterns like those found in busy urban settings or noisy open offices activate sympathetic pathways. That pushes the brain toward vigilance, distraction, and shallow processing, which impairs both focus and retention. There's also a timing element here. The kind of sound you expose yourself to right before a learning session can act like a primer, preparing your neurochemistry for attention and plasticity. Even brief exposure to certain frequencies or acoustic rhythms can tune the brain for optimal performance. In practical terms, this means your ability to learn is not just about willpower or effort, it's about creating the right auditory conditions. Sound doesn't just set the mood, it sets the state. And that state determines how well you learn, how deeply you focus, and how effectively your brain rewires in response to experience. Sound enters the nervous system through the auditory pathways, but its influence spreads far beyond hearing. When a sound is detected by the inner ear, it's converted into electrical signals that travel not only to the auditory cortex for interpretation, but also to areas that regulate attention, emotion, and arousal. This includes the thalamus, which acts as a relay station for sensory information, and the locus coeruleus, which plays a key role in triggering the release of norepinephrine, a chemical tightly linked to alertness and readiness to learn. This means that sound is one of the fastest, most direct ways to shift the brain into different operating modes. For instance, a sudden sharp noise can activate the fight or flight system almost instantaneously, pushing your brain into a high alert, reactive state. That state is not ideal for thoughtful focus or deep learning. It's designed for threat detection and immediate action. On the other hand, a stable auditory environment filled with low, predictable frequencies can reduce sympathetic nervous system activity and encourage parasympathetic tone. In this calmer state, your prefrontal cortex, responsible for attention, planning, and decision-making, can function more efficiently. Importantly, these shifts in brain state aren't just about how you feel, they directly determine how your brain processes and stores information. In a heightened alert state caused by disruptive or loud environments, working memory and cognitive flexibility decrease. The brain prioritizes scanning for threats over encoding complex information. But in a calm and focused state, your brain releases neuromodulators like acetylcholine, which enhance synaptic plasticity, your brain's ability to form and strengthen new neural connections. So, in a very real and measurable sense, the sounds around you and the ones you choose to expose yourself to either set up your brain for deep, sustained learning or sabotage it. Whether you're trying to study, solve a problem, or engage in creative thinking, the right auditory input acts as a tuning fork for the brain, aligning its chemistry and circuitry with the demands of the task. Sound isn't just background, it's a control mechanism. And once you understand how it works, you can use it deliberately to switch your brain into the optimal state for whatever you're trying to achieve. Sound shapes the internal environment of the brain by influencing the balance of neurochemicals that govern attention, memory, and learning. When you focus on a specific auditory input like a spoken lecture, a piece of instrumental music, or even the rhythm of your own breathing, you engage neural circuits that involve the prefrontal cortex and basal forebrain. This engagement triggers the release of acetylcholine, a powerful neuromodulator that marks certain neural circuits as important and flags them for change. In other words, when you tune into sound with deliberate attention, your brain interprets that focus as a cue to strengthen and adapt the neural pathways involved. That's neuroplasticity in action. But it's not just about attention, it's about timing. The brain is highly state dependent, and auditory attention helps create the conditions necessary for encoding long-term memories. For learning to occur, the brain must not only receive information, but also tag that information as relevant. Focused listening enhances this tagging process. For example, listening to well-paced speech or rhythm-based audio can synchronize neural oscillations, your brain waves, with the external input. This synchronization increases the probability that the incoming information will be stored and recalled effectively later. Moreover, the act of filtering sound, choosing what to pay attention to and what to ignore, builds selective attention, a core cognitive skill. Every time you resist the distraction of background noise and stay engaged with a primary audio source, you strengthen the circuits involved in executive function. This is particularly crucial in learning environments where your ability to block out irrelevant noise determines much of the meaningful content gets encoded. This makes your auditory environment not just a backdrop, but a tool. It becomes a way to train your brain in real time, whether you're consciously aware of it or not. By engaging with sound in a focused, intentional way, you're actually shaping the biology of your attention system, preparing it to absorb, integrate, and retain complex information. So, the next time you want to enter a high-focus, high-retention state, don't just think about what you're doing, think about what you're hearing. Because what your ears are locked onto determines how your brain responds and how well it learns. The quality of the sound environment you immerse yourself in has a direct and measurable impact on cognitive performance. In environments filled with chaotic or unpredictable noise like loud traffic, chatter in open office spaces, or high-pitched mechanical sounds, the brain is forced into a constant state of vigilance. This constant low-level stress response drains cognitive resources. It increases cortisol, narrows attentional bandwidth, and impairs the encoding of new information. The brain is effectively stuck in a mode where it's scanning for potential threats rather than focusing deeply on the task at hand. Contrast that with environments designed with intentional auditory input, what we call acoustic enrichment. These are spaces where the soundscape supports, rather than disrupts, brain function. Controlled ambient noise, low-frequency hums, or rhythmic patterns like those found in nature or in carefully designed focused music reduce background stress and increase parasympathetic tone. This calms the nervous system, widens attentional capacity, and creates the internal stability required for deeper levels of learning and creativity. But it's not just about calming the brain. Properly designed sound environments can stimulate the exact kind of neural activity that promotes plasticity and long-term memory formation. The timing, frequency, and rhythm of sound can align with brainwave patterns, creating what's known as entrainment. When the auditory system receives input at the right frequency, particularly in the alpha 8 to 12 haze, or theta 4 to 8, yarnges, the brain naturally synchronizes with it. This synchronization facilitates states of relaxed focus and increased suggestibility, which are ideal for learning, problem solving, and behavior change. The takeaway is this: learning doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's highly sensitive to context, especially the auditory context. Most people underestimate how much their sound environment shapes their ability to concentrate and retain information. If you're serious about upgrading your focus and learning capacity, then curating your auditory input is not optional, it's foundational. Your ears are feeding constant signals to your nervous system, and those signals are either pulling you toward high-performance brain states or pushing you away from them. You can't control everything in your environment, but sound is one lever you can move with precision. Use it wisely. So what does all of this mean? It means that your ears are doing far more than just hearing. They are actively shaping the way your brain functions. Every sound you're exposed to is either pulling you toward focus and learning or away from it. The auditory system is wired directly into the very circuits that regulate attention, stress, memory, and neuroplasticity. Sound sets the state, and state determines outcome. Whether you're preparing for deep work, absorbing new information, or trying to recover and consolidate what you've learned, the sounds you allow into your system matter a lot. A lot. This isn't about preferences or aesthetics. This is about biology. It's about leveraging the nervous system deliberately to get the brain into the right mode at the right time for the task at hand. You can choose to let your sound environment control you, or you can start to control it. And when you do, you're not just managing distractions, you're tuning your brain to become sharper, more adaptable, and more capable of real, lasting learning. Your ears are a powerful tool. Use them with intention, because the path to deeper focus, faster learning, and better performance starts not with your eyes, but with what you hear.